So today, I think we pitched this as grow your startup with the metrics that matter. And as Ruben said, I work in a digital transformation firm. So about 5 months ago, I started this new firm, and we've been doing work in digital transformation and also user experience design, as Ruben was saying. Before that, the last time I was here, I did a presentation about 2 years ago where we focused on user experience design and getting people into applications quickly and easily. And there's a lot of the same thinking that underlines what we're going to do today, which is all about making decisions on an operational basis that helps your customers get through and helps you grow your business and that kind of thing. Getting going, I'm just going to tell you a bit about myself, a bit about my business, just so you get some context. We called our company Vic Digital. People keep asking us why we chose that name, and really, I'll tell you the story actually. Basically, a while ago when we started talking about forming this company, one of my friends, he owns a PR firm in London, and he's got an office in Victoria, and he said, "Would you like an office here?" And I said, "Okay." So then the word Vic sort of stuck in my head. And then we decided not to do that, but I really like the word Vic. It doesn't mean anything. It's not even a word actually, it's just a sound, but it kind of sounded like quick to me. So I thought, well, okay, that's good, because we wanted to make our business all about speed and velocity and doing things quickly and effectively. Essentially what we do is we do growth strategy and operational efficiency. We do growth strategy by allowing you to identify greater value in a market, understand what people want, and also we do operational efficiency around making information flow faster through your business so you can act on it quickly and more effectively. This is me and my business partner. So a bit about myself. I was an undergraduate here more than 15 years ago. I think about the same time as Ruben, actually. In fact, one of my best friends was a classmate of yours, right? Well, actually, two people. And then after that, so I worked around the world. I worked in Japan for a while. I then moved to America. I went to graduate school in America, and I worked in software in America as well. That's where I met Nikhil here. He went to the same graduate school as me, and so then he moved to the UK as well, completely randomly. And I found out I was here, and we said, okay, let's get together. We have the same mentality, complementary skill sets. Let's build our business. This is the kind of end result of what we do. We're kind of like management consultants, so we go in and we help restructure businesses, but 9 out of 10 times, the thing that we help to restructure the business tends to be an application. This is some of our work here. Actually, interestingly, this is something that we did for Sharif. That's the work we've done. So he was one of the Dragon's Den winners a couple of years ago, and he asked me to help him put together an application, and so we did that for him. Anyway, so back to the presentation. Today we've got a presentation called "Grow Your Startup with the Metrics That Matter." This is effectively what we do in our business. We work with our clients to sort of break down their business and understand those businesses as a series of modules. And then as those modules are put together in a kind of structure, we look at how do we move information and decision making much more quickly and effectively through that business. And part of that really is understanding how do we measure it, because if we can't measure it, then it's really, really hard to know what improvement looks like. And so when we think about our business ourselves, we say, well, it's all about metrics, really. We're looking at how does information, how does decision-making go through your business, and how can we measure that and then experiment in different ways to improve it. So about this lecture, what we're going to do is really we're going to hit on 3 points. One is about rapid experimentation, and that's, again, one of the areas that I've built my career up around is rapid digital innovation, which is doing a lot of research and then quickly building things and testing them and then going back to see if we can build businesses out of them. We're going to be talking about aligning behavior, that's organizational behavior. And what we mean by that is, well, I'll talk about it later, but effectively doing the things that make sense for your business and not doing the things that don't make sense for your business. That's really, really obvious on a high level, but when it comes down to running a business, and especially a startup, which is very, very chaotic, it's easy to lose sight of actually what's important and what's not. And then the last one is setting goals. Everyone knows you've got to set goals, but what I've seen that really, really works is actually just pushing your organization towards achieving those goals. Because what I've seen a lot with clients, with friends who've had businesses and startups, with people I've just worked with, is that goals can very, very quickly become passive. They can just set them and you go, oh, we missed it. Or you hit it and you go, great, we hit it. But it was not actually there as something you say, we're going to actively just shove our organization along until we hit that goal. And that's partly what we're doing here today as well. But first, before we go into this, I felt that, rather than just relaying, sort of lessons and lessons, I really wanted to show you how I came to my way of looking at business and putting this kind of thing together, because this is really summarizing our mindset in an organization. And this was built up over, I guess, my formative years before, graduating from the University of Southampton, going out and getting a job, working in different organizations, joining some startups, leaving some startups, joining some other startups. And you learn things, you pick up things, you see what works and what doesn't. And a lot of what I just said at a high level came from my background. So I want to tell you about that. And it all started here. Does anyone recognize this building? Yes, that's right. I didn't know what it's called now, but actually when I was a student, it was the British Gas building. And when I graduated, I didn't really know what to do. It's really interesting to me that now the students I meet that are coming out of the university are so proactive and they're so switched on. They know exactly what they want to do and they go out and do it. And it's amazing because when I graduated, I had no clue what I wanted to do. And there was kind of at the time, there was a year where there was just no graduate jobs as well. And we all kind of came out and we're like, oh goodness, what do we do? And a lot of us ended up, at least for a short period of time, working at British Gas, manning the phones. And we used to call it affectionately the graduate graveyard because you'd see people that were still there a couple of years later and you think, oh God, I hope that's not me. But anyway, it was actually a really, really poor experience as a job, but it taught me some really interesting things. So effectively, my job was people would call up about their bills, and you only call up about your bills when there's something wrong with your bill, and then you had to resolve it and sort of put the phone down and move on and do the next one. And everyone's angry, so you get a constant stream of abuse when people are calling you all day long, 8 hours a day. It's not a great job, and people are still doing these jobs today, so I'm always very, very sympathetic when I'm that person calling. But anyway, when I joined, it happened to coincide with a new managing director who had all these ideas. He came over from America. He had all these ideas of how do we get this kind of aging organization called British Gas. It had a monopoly in the UK and now had to relinquish some of that monopoly and allow other players coming in. How do we get that business to do well? And he came up with this a theory. It's like, right, what we really need to do is we need to increase sales in our non-core services because we have a monopoly. We have to retain our service as much as we can, but because of the monopoly law, we actually have to price effectively above all of our competitors. And so we're going to get attrition of customers over time. And we need to get new customers in non-core services where we can actually compete against other monopolies. So we can now compete at lower prices than the guys that have monopoly in electricity. And we can compete at lower prices with BT. So his idea was, right, well, I have all these guys on the phone. I'm going to get them to be more efficient at their jobs, and I'm also going to go and get them to sell all these other services. And so what he said was, right, I want to incentivize this behavior. I want to have everyone doing 10 calls an hour, and I want everyone to sell at least one telephone contract a day. I'll explain why this is a formative experience in a second. But so you can imagine, right, so you've got these people, and they have people phoning them up, really angry because they have a small house, and you just sent them a bill for £3,000, and they use a little gas cooker or something like that, and they're furious about it because we all run on estimates. And then you say, okay, fine, we'll fix that. Would you like to buy something else off us after we've screwed this up? And obviously, the answer is no, 99 times out of 100. And sometimes they weirdly say yes, and I could never figure out why. But anyway, the incentivized behavior this CEO wanted was, okay, I want everyone to be doing 70, 80 calls a day. That's crazy. It's a lot of calls. And I want you to sell to at least one of those 70, 80 people that are calling up one contract. And so, effectively, he was saying, well, that's an 80 to 1 probability. Everyone can do that, right? Everyone can do that. No big deal. And if we do these things, we're going to be highly efficient. We're going to have more bandwidth. We're going to be solving more problems. Fixing more accounts. And we're going to be growing our business outside of gas. And actually what happened, can anyone guess what happened with these incentives that he put in place? No? Well, okay, I'll fill in the details then. So actually what happened was that every time a phone call came in, and we had these systems that showed you the history of that account in the past. Every time one came in and it had a really, really long log file, the immediate thing that everyone did was slam the phone down and pretend that the customer hung up. And then it'd say, customer hung up, tried calling back, no answer. Because no one wanted to ruin their statistics of suddenly going to a 30-minute phone call and then getting in trouble with their manager. So the incentives were completely misaligned. The other thing was that the telephone contract sale, the telephone contracts, the people that were just nailing that over and over again were just promising the moon. And they would say, oh yeah, it's completely cheap, you can do this, you can do that. They would just say anything. And then they would sell 10, 15, 20 of these contracts a day, and every single time they did it, they would get like a £5 bonus or something like that. So they're doing that 5 days a week, selling 10. They're suddenly, like these guys who are used to not earning that much money are making loads and loads of money, and it's great. Unfortunately, when all those customers found out that the contract that they signed up to wasn't as cheap or effective as, or the service was as good as it was promised, they would cancel, which would then cost the business loads of money. So actually the actual results was that you got loads of angry customers because the people with problems never had their problems resolved. And that stacked up more and more and more because people were refusing to resolve core issues, underlying issues. I, in fact, used to like solving the issues because it was more challenging than just filling in a form and saying, yep, okay, next. And I constantly got in trouble with it with my manager. So I got disincentivized for doing it. And then the sales, I was absolutely rubbish at sales because I couldn't lie. And I'd say, well, we're actually about the same price, and there'll be like a 2-week waiting period where you have no phone or something like that. So I was not very good at this job, but a lot of people were, but it caused loads of untold issues. Well, kind of actually retrospectively quite obvious issues with the running of the organization. And this just stuck with me for a really long time as a formative experience, which is, just be really careful. I mean, I was there as a recent graduate, and there's this hotshot CEO coming in and taking over an enormous organization, and you could sit there and go, well, that's really stupid because you know exactly what's going to happen. And what it taught me was that you've got to be really, really careful about what you incentivize because the outcome might not be what you intended for. But if you think about human beings, they're always going to find a little loophole, and you've got to think about that and incentivize the right things. Right. I'm going to go on to my next experience. So moving on from there, years and years later, I'm working in the USA, and I'm working in software as a service. I was a product manager at a software as a service company, so software as a service, if you don't know, works on a subscription model. Everyone probably has some sort of software as a service now. If you don't, the company that you work for probably does. You pay on a monthly or annual basis, you go in, you log in, and it just keeps going and going. And as a business model, it's absolutely fantastic. And the reason why is because tracking those metrics and actually understanding how does this business model work is very, very easy. These are effectively, when I was in SaaS, these were the biggest statistics, and they still are, the metrics that you really need to follow. The CAC up here, or people just call it CAC, is the cost of acquiring a customer, and people will know that from other industries as well. But this is incredible. This is the largest driving metric in SaaS. The other one here is lifetime value, and what that means is when you have a SaaS business model, you're going to go out there and you're going to look for customers to sign up to your service, and maybe it's HubSpot or maybe it's I don't know, what's one that everyone uses as a software as a service? Spotify. Oh, great, yeah. A consumer one, so Spotify. So they'll have a budget, and they'll say, right, we need to get someone on our platform, and that will cost us this much money to get them on there. It's a variable cost to get them signed up and using our software, and that's your cost of acquisition. Then they can say, every time someone signs up, they're going to pay us £10 a month, And they usually last about 5 years or 10 years, whatever it is. So if you look at that, so they'll say, well, £10 a month for 5 years is 60 months, so that's every single customer that we get to sign up is £600. And you start combining these, right? So you say, all right, how much money can we spend to acquire that customer? And it turns out that there's some ratios when you're working in SaaS that can tell you whether your business is going to succeed or whether it's just going to fail. Because if you don't hit those ratios, then you are in danger of not having enough cash flow and enough money to actually keep powering your business forward. And the biggest one really, or one of the biggest ones, is the CAC ratio is what it's called, the lifetime value divided by the cost of acquisition. And what that says is, if you're Spotify and you can expect to get £600 per customer, because the average age of the average length of a contract is 5 years or 60 months, then that 60 months times £10, so the £600 that lifetime value is, divided by the cost of acquisition needs to be 3 or more, or we're going to go out of business. So what that means is that Spotify effectively has a cap of £200 per, I'm just making these numbers up by the way, I don't really know Spotify that well, but £200 per customer to get them on their system and going as a user, a paying user. The other one is, and this is actually much more important if you're in a SaaS business, is the months to recover the cost of acquisition. So now the first one, we said, okay, they have £200. That's absolute minimum to recover the money. Now, if they spend £200 and they're actually getting £10 a month from each customer, it's going to take them 20 months to recover that money, right? Every time I sign up a customer, I have to wait 20 months before I even break even on the variable costs associated with acquiring that customer, never mind the underlying operational costs of running this business. It turns out on that one, you really need to have it less than 12 months, and ideally the gold standard is somewhere like 6 to 8 months to get your money back. So if you know those metrics, you can start making operational decisions within your organization to say, right, we've got a problem here, or we need to aim at this, or we need to price like this. The reason why that one's so important is because if you have more than a year to recover your money, then you are fundamentally stunting your growth because you're not going to have that positive cash flow to invest in more sales apparatus. You're not going to be able to invest in salespeople, or if you're Spotify, I guess it's SEO, content marketing, and so on. Those things that really power the users coming in and getting them to sign up. You need to be less than a year so you can keep reinvesting and build momentum and greater bandwidth to grow. Now that's with SaaS. SaaS, as I said, is a subscription model, so it's very, very predictable. People sign up and they pay you basically the same amount of money until they quit. But what this really did for me is it got me kind of enamored with this idea that you could break down a business and turn it into a kind of mechanical construct, just like a car or something like that, and say, right, well, if I want this business to go so fast, or if I want it to run, then all these bits have to join up and they have to make sense with each other. And then we can optimize things, we can change things, we can push ourselves in different directions, we can make decisions so that it will run faster or more efficiently, and so on. And this is how we do it. We put a metric there and we can say, where are we? And we're over that line or we're under that line. And we can say, okay, how do we become more efficient or more effective? And that gives you direction to how you think about your business, how you innovate, how you experiment, how you move forward. Now, there's other things that that influenced me as well. Those are just like high-level metrics. And at the time, unit economics is not new at all. Unit economics or contribution margins and that kind of thing, standard accounting. But it tells you a lot. The unit economics of any business is really just the revenue minus the variable cost. That's the contribution margin that goes to your business. So if I have one account on Spotify, for example, thank you for that example, it's very useful in this talk, then I know that if I get this much revenue, I can just subtract the variable cost, and that's actually building my business over time. And it's really simple to think of that. And this is one of the underlying things that are really going to power your business forward if you can understand what are the unit economics. Now, when I'm talking about Spotify, as I said, I love SaaS businesses and subscription models because they're so predictable. It's not so easy if you're selling something that you have to produce and sell and you don't know what time that person's going to come back, if ever, and buy another unit. But what it can tell you is that, how do I start thinking about my business? There's another element that I started thinking about. So these are all formative experiences that are shaping my thinking about how to run businesses. So going back, I started thinking about, we have these metrics that are really easy to apply to SaaS models, less easy to apply to other businesses, but they are still there. And if we can find what they are, then we can start pushing ourselves towards better and better performance. The next thing is like saying, okay, well, each business, they produce units of value, and if we can understand what the revenues and the costs are, then we can start understanding how this value builds on a kind of an atomic level. These atoms are coming in of value, and we're growing our business. And then the next point is that, okay, so what is a unit of production in our business? That's actually not that easy to answer some of the time, because I'm sure if we're talking about an application that services students to register into their classroom, what is the unit of value there? It's actually not that easy. It's easy to think about it when we're talking about Spotify, which is a very, very simple model, but when you have other businesses, which I'm sure a lot of you have, it gets harder and you have to think about it really, really deeply. And the second point is, okay, even if we have this unit of value that will power our business, we still need to think about how fast we can go through that cycle as well. And that's the second element. But in terms of where I was in some of my formative experience, I sort of went through those, firstly, I had this kind of bad experience where I didn't really like this job, and I just saw it, this is a really, really badly run, archaic business with incentives that are just not aligned with things that are going to grow the business and make the customers happier and the employees happier. Everything was misaligned. Then I went into the software world, and it was like this kind of clear cut, wow, you can just power your business. It's almost like a checklist. If you get these metrics in place, and you can start thinking about your business and you make decision making to push yourself towards those targets, that's great. But then you start looking at other businesses. It's not so easy to do over there, but there is a way if you can study that business enough. Right, so after that, last formative experience, this is like the fourth startup I've been in on one level or other. This time I'm in a driving seat, so that's really nice. I can do things the way I think it should be done. But my experience of being in startups is really, a startup is a collection of opportunities that you have this kind of vague idea of where you're going to go, and there's a bunch of opportunities in front of you, and you don't really know which one to pursue. Like, as being in a startup is like a process. It's not really a business. It doesn't have a sustainable competitive advantage when you first start. You haven't built those things yet, but you're in a process to kind of discover and cement that sustainable competitive advantage. And what you're confronted with is, where do I go? What do I do first? I've kind of put this into a graph here, and it's very abstract, so you'll have to bear with me. I had to think of a way to summarize various different dimensions that are overlapping and not necessarily related to each other at any one time, and say, how do I put that in one chart? So what I've got here is a chart that says, right, on the y-axis here, we're going to kind of, if you imagine these as rows, it's not actually an axis, these are rows. These are all the opportunities in front of you. It could be, here's a product market niche fit. So if we go in a product direction that matches that niche perfectly, here's that represents that. Or it could be, here's a tactic or a strategy that we're going to pursue. And each one of these kind of activities, or opportunities and directions for activity, has a certain amount of unknown potential, right? So you might have one activity or one product market fit that has enormous potential, and then you have a lot of others that don't have really much potential. But when you're in a startup, you don't really know. You have some vague ideas. Probably you have an imagination that one of these in your mind is like, that's going to be loads and loads of money, or that's going to be really, really effective to help our business. And so the process of being in a startup is identifying which one of these activities is the most effective. And when I was in a startup, a couple of the startups I've been in, there was a lot of good intention, there was a lot of skill and talent and so on, but there was just an enormous chaotic, people were just running around doing the things that they thought would work, then they'd find out they don't work, but they've spent inordinate amounts of time and money pursuing that to find out later on it didn't work, and actually, retrospectively, we could have discovered that earlier on. And it was very, very chaotic and just inefficient. And I think one of the problems today, a lot of startups that are going out, is that people just accept that as part of the startup culture. You definitely need rapid experimentation, but having it chaotic and not controlled is not necessarily fundamentally necessary for running a startup. You need to have inspiration and innovation, and you need to be able to branch out, and you don't want to shut off any of those roads too early, but you can do it in a controlled manner. And so in terms of investment, what I found was that you'd often end up in a situation like this, where you'd say, okay, we have this unknown potential, these black bars across here, and our organization is just going after them in retrospectively random amounts of investment and time. And so you get something here that doesn't have much potential, but you're putting tons of time and tons of money into pursuing it because you don't know how big that line is, right? Same up there. Maybe there's actually more potential here, but you've cut it off or you've starved it. This one here you've given up already because you didn't know what was going to happen. Now, this is very, very abstract, right? So if you start thinking about this, how does this work in real world? It's all going to fall apart. I'm just trying to represent what I'm trying to get across here, which is effectively you can end up wasting a lot of money or you can end up missing a lot of opportunity because you're not really measuring things and going things about the right way and getting a handle on how do we effectively experiment, understand where the potential lies, and push towards maximizing that opportunity. Or even just like closing things off before we waste a lot of time and money, right? So ideally, you want to do this. Now, this is never going to happen, right? This is what this represents here is that you're going to ignore all of the low opportunity areas, and you're just going to maximize all of your effort and investment into the high opportunity areas. Now, obviously, that's never going to happen because you're not going to know that that's low opportunity unless you do some investment there, right? But that's kind of like the ideal. If you could do that, you would. But people do this just because they treat it as a kind of an ad hoc, right? We're going to go at it. We're going to experiment. It's a startup. It's it's chaotic. It's the process, that kind of thing. It's just kind of excuses, right? You can go about it. You can be metronomic. You can just keep pushing your business forward to grow. And I think the businesses I've seen that have done really, really well have been more like that. There is always a little bit of chaos. There's always a little bit of scrambling around doing things. But the ones that really, really do well, they treat their success as effectively inevitable, and you just keep pushing and pushing and pushing. So the first point is rapid experimentation. This is really important because when you're dealing with a startup, by definition, you're either entering an old market with a new method, or you're just doing something completely new. And there's so many unknowns out there. You need to find out what those unknowns are and then make them known. And so you've got to focus on a method to direct your activity and then either shut things off very, very early or keep going. Right, so going back to that graph, we have that potential. Oops. And we're going to figure out how do we get to the maximum potential on each one of those. How do we direct our activity so that's aligned with our maximum possible success as a startup? There's one method, and I'm sure some of you in this audience are thinking, wow, this is all really obvious so far. And actually, that's kind of the point of today, is that this stuff is actually quite obvious, but it's just not done. I don't know why it isn't sometimes, but if you really sit back and you get a handle of your business, you can start saying, okay, let's just get a handle on this. Let's analyze how business actually functions. How do we make money? How are we going to? Where is the best places to go? And then just push towards those directions. And so, what I always do is I use this framework. Which is measure, benchmark, test, and improve. I think you can't really do anything unless you either, if you're improving, you're either doing this unknowingly and you're kind of doing it ad hoc and you don't really realize there's a process underneath it, or if you're not doing it, you're just running around, and if you do happen to have success, then it's just complete fluke. But what you want to be doing is figuring out how your business works. You want to measure it, you want to benchmark across so that you can make decisions. You want to test things. You want to bring in an experiment and say, okay, this is how we're performing today. Can we improve on that? So you test, you weigh up the results, and then you employ the one that works better and you improve. So measure, benchmark, test, improve is something that is a framework of going about this rapid experimentation. Now, what this does, if you start having this in your organization, what you can do is, rather than having these big what do they call it, big audacious, big hairy audacious goals, whatever they call them, BHAGs, instead of just going for these enormous bets, which are either going to completely make you as an organization or they're going to sink you. If you start building this into your culture and a way of thinking, you can just make small bets. You can make small, continuously low-risk payoff bets where you just keep grinding it out forward and forward and forward. You keep doing small things. I'll give you an example. So recently, I started teaching at the University of Southampton as a visiting lecturer in the business department, and we had a really great class. And there was 9 teams in the end that did all their. They had to create business plans for startups and figure out like how do we raise money, how do we go about things, and actually one of them has actually been talking to Ruben about potentially working with Future Worlds and doing it for real, which is really cool. But one of the things that I noticed between the kind of the more successful teams and less successful teams is that the more successful teams had a really good handle on how do I grow the business from 0 to 1 mile an hour? How do I grow it from 1 mile to 2 mile and then 2 miles to 5 miles an hour and so on? A lot of the ideas of how do I actually grow my business, they would revolve around things like, well, we're going to do a social media platform, we're going to do an Instagram campaign, we're going to get influencers and all this kind of thing. And it's like, great, if that works, then good. But that's like a big bet. And if it doesn't work, then your model is broken. Some of the other ones that had really, really good go-to-market strategies of actually getting their businesses going would say things like, well, I want to sell this product, so my first step is I'm going to make a list of every single shop in Southampton that's a suitable fit. I'm going to knock on their doors, I'm going to put my product in front of them, and I'm going to talk to them. And I've worked out that I can do 10 of those visits a day. There's 80 of those shops in Southampton. So I can visit all of them in like a 2-week period. I can go back and visit them again. And I can start grinding out results and making increasing amounts of sales over time. That doesn't sound really that exciting, to be honest, when you're talking about startups and getting going. But actually, it's much, much more effective than doing the big experiment of like, we're going to have a content campaign. We're going to put all our activity around the mobile apps to get users to sign up to our loyalty programs and that kind of thing. But what he's basically said was, the smallest bet that we can make is that I'm going to invest my time into talking to someone for half an hour. And then I'm going to spend half an hour going to the next place. I'm going to talk to that person for half an hour, and we're going to see how it goes. So those continuous small bets, they build and build and build. As they go through, now what they didn't do, because it's only like a university course, it's not for real. But what you would do if you're in that situation is that you would measure the effectiveness of what you're pitching that week. And then you'd say, okay, how well did we do? And then you'd say, right, let's try 2 different tactics next week, and we're going to measure which ones are more effective. And you do the next week, and then you'd say, okay, this is more effective, let's start doing that. Let's introduce something else and see which one's more effective. And then that way you start learning, okay, how do we just nail these sales pitches? How do we actually get, more pitches in a week? Because if you start doing that, you start getting sales, you can employ your next salesperson who goes to, I don't know, Bournemouth or Basingstoke or Reading or something and starts doing the same. You can start building your business up and up and up in that way. So yeah, continuous small bets are much, much more effective. especially if you start benchmarking your performance around these bets and going in increasingly effective directions. Right, so in doing that, I've been told not to apologize, but this is actually quite high level. And the reason why is I originally thought this was a 25-minute speech, so I kind of went, oh, I'll just go at high level, but we can talk about the deeper elements later on. What you need to do then in your organization, so you've got this idea of like, we're gonna measure, benchmark, test, improve, so you've got to add an element of time to it. We're not just gonna do this as an ad hoc thing. We need to set little goals, and we need to come back and measure at a certain point. And effectively what that means is that you develop a cadence. If anyone's worked in software, in Agile, and you work in like 2-week sprints, and you say, right, this is what we're going to achieve in 2 weeks, you go at it, you complete it, you do the next 2 weeks, and you keep going, and you build the momentum up like that. That's what you need to do here as well in your organization. You need to say, right, next week, next 2 weeks, next month, we're going to hit this, and then you're going to go at it, and you're going to experiment, you're going to learn and learn and learn until you hit that target at the end of the month, or you don't. But then you're going to say, right, what do we learn? What are we going to employ next month? And you've got to keep doing it. Now, in terms of, that's kind of like on the ground tactical methods. In terms of exploring markets in which direction, you can do that too. You can tweak things, you can pitch things differently, you can see what sticks, what people buy into. But when you find it sticks, you've just got to go hard at it and seize that momentum. But if it doesn't stick, you need to make a call on that and say, this isn't working, but this one is. And just keep going forward and building momentum there. Now, setting behavior, the British Gas stuff. British Gas is such a great experience because I had some friends that worked there, and we just laugh at how, I don't know if I should say this on camera, like, I don't know, maybe it's come back to haunt me, but it was so badly run. I think it's probably better run now, but it was a good lesson in terms of, be careful what you ask for. So when you're setting behavior, you've got to think about that experiment cycle that you're going through and how you can just keep pushing and pushing and pushing and building that momentum. And you have to ask yourself, which activities will make our organization grow? And really think about that well, because answering that question, you can say more sales. Right? That's what you want to do, more sales. Let's incentivize more sales. And it's kind of a spurious and silly thing to say, because actually what's that mean? That's not really an activity, it's an outcome of a set of activities. So what you need to focus on is what are the underlying activities that will actually do that. And then secondly, you have to say, how do I incentivize it in a way that will get exactly the result and not some unintended consequence where that's going to cost my organization. And as I said, you're aiming for this. That kind of like maximum fit. I'll tell you about, so Vic, this is what happened with us. Desired result, like what we learned very, very early on. And in terms of our organization now, it's very similar to the organization that I was part of before, except we're focusing on a slightly different direction, different methodologies and so on. But what we've really learned is that to power our business forward, we're highly, highly reliant on face-to-face meetings with qualified clients. Right? If we can get in front of someone and talk to them about their business, about our services, about our mentality and our mindset and our skills and that kind of stuff, we know we have a very, very high ability to strike up a relationship with that person. If we can't do that, then we don't have a very high probability. And actually, if anyone's gone to our website, you'll notice that our website isn't even up yet because we haven't really. It's not something that's that important for us to grow our business at this stage. What is important is face-to-face meetings with highly qualified clients. So what we've done is we've structured all of our activity towards those things. And we've also eliminated everything that isn't to do with that. So, we say no a lot is probably the thing. And so what we've tried to do is we've incentivized effectiveness and fit instead of volume. So we're not saying, get us face-to-face meetings, because if we just did that, we'd spend a lot of time having lunches with people that wouldn't lead anywhere. And that actually in the first month, that happened a lot, and I kind of got really annoyed and I exploded and I said, we're not doing this anymore. right? So we started putting in like learning from this. This is just a waste of time. Every time we do this, we lose momentum. We lose speed in our organization. So let's do less, but we'll make sure that it's a really, really good fit. And when we have that fit, then our outcome is probably better. And then the probable result from that, rather than if you think back to the British Gas thing, was that we had much less meetings, which freed up our time to actually do productive work and to have good results for our clients, but we had much, much more attractive outcomes. And so yeah, basically and we're going to use this template going forward. Now, we don't really have an incentive apart from our business doesn't fail because we're owners of the company, but that's a pretty big incentive, to be honest. But as we grow the company and we're bringing people on, this is what we're going to focus on, because in previous organizations I've seen is that they just reward the high level numbers. They say, okay, get it in, and then they say great, and it's like a very, very high level thing. But when you sort of ripple down, people getting face-to-face meetings that with someone that's inappropriate leads to undersold or inappropriate projects, which leads to unhappy teams, which leads to bad outcomes, which leads to slowing down of the organizational momentum. We don't want to do that. We want to have a really, really good fit very, very early on. So, we just use this framework to say, what do we want, what do we incentivize, and what's the probable result for that? Okay. So in summary on that section, you really need to have clarity. What results matter. You need to reward aligned behavior. And you need to monitor and adjust, because again, you don't want to treat this as a one-shot. We need to get it right first time, and we're going to be perfect. There is always unintended consequences of what you do, but you need to go back and say, oh, look at that. Okay, let's change that and disincentivize that behavior and encourage this behavior instead. Now, the last point I want to do, what I want to talk about today in terms of understanding your business, finding out what metrics really, really matter, and then pushing towards those goals is talking about just effectively setting goals and pushing. So at this point in time, you should have understood your business model. That's like how your business model comes together, the sort of fundamental mechanics of your business, and then you should understand your growth mechanics. That is, what metrics underneath your business are really, really important. I'm not sure what's going on there. What mechanics underneath your business leads to growth, and you need to find those and then push towards them, and you need to set goals. And the goals are really important. I forgot what slide's coming next, so I'll just have a look. Oh yeah, right. The goals are really important because I know everyone says, okay, they just put like a high level target, and that's really important. But you want to have lower level targets as well, and this goes back to those metrics that you're tracking through your business, where you can say this metric really, really matters. If we hit this metric or we exceed this metric, our business is going to succeed. If we don't, it's going to fail. And you need to have goals around those, so that top level goal of, we're going to hit this much money this year and whatnot, or this many sales or this many clients, can actually be achieved, because those ones are really, really hard when you're an individual in an organization. But if you have lower level goals, whether that you can work towards actively and proactively, then those bigger level goals will emerge. And the thing that I've learned about setting goals is really this: a goal is a fiction and a narrative. It's just completely arbitrary, right? A goal, you achieve it, you don't achieve it, it didn't make any difference to your business, but really, because it is what it is in that sort of static moment, but it gives you something to work towards, and that's all it is. So you've got to understand that your goal is a fiction, but it provides a narrative to yourself and your organizational psychology and everything else. And the way I look at it is like, okay, when we set a goal, what we're doing is we're saying, I'm imagining myself in 1 year's time, and we're going to be here at this point, and we're going to be able to say to people at that point in the future, yeah, that last year was great because we did this, this, and this is our trajectory, and this is where we're going. And that's why all this stuff is important. You're creating a narrative as well. You're saying, we're going to get there, because once you get there, from that point, you can say, well, next we'll go here. You're creating this you're creating this belief in your organization that you're unstoppable and you can start moving towards it. But, that's the high level goal. And then below that, you need to anchor it with those growth mechanics, those lower level metrics that individual people, individual teams can work towards. Right. So again, at this point, you've understood the business model, you've understood the growth mechanics behind it, you've set your goals, and as a leader that these goals are kind of a fiction. You've just sort of pulled them out of the air, but you know that they're the right fiction to motivate your team into the right kind of behavior. And then this is the most crucial point. You've got to push. The startups and organizations that I've seen succeed, I'm not talking about the big organizations. I worked with some larger organizations in the past, and they just have this kind of like organizational momentum that's unstoppable. But the smaller ones, where you need to make huge leaps in growth and size very, very quickly so you can get to a critical mass, the ones that really do well, they actively push. And I'll bring this down to a real, like kind of real life thing. Has anyone ever set a budget for their household spendings or anything? So, yep, I see some not. Yep, okay. Now, of those people, when you set a budget and you say, okay, at the end of the week, this was my spending at the end of that week, did that lead to any active change in your subsequent weeks' behavior? Right, so it did. All right, well, you're good. Right. Most people I know, they set these household budgets, and they'll say, okay, in this week, we're able to spend this much money on groceries or going out, whatever it is. And then they'll get to the end of the week, and they'll go, oh, we went over that budget by £20 or something. And they'll go, oh, well, we'll try harder next time. Right, but that's not the purpose of a budget. It's not supposed to be like a tool that makes you feel guilty about yourself. It's supposed to be a tool that says, right, that's what happened. What do we do next week so that we can get back to that flat line? And so when you set a household budget, it's a very small sandbox exercise for you. If you do go over, then you need to look at your next week's behavior and say, I need to change my behavior. I need to do something differently to get back on target. And that's what those setting those goals were. And it's really weird because I don't really see that happening a lot in organizations where they have a target, they have metrics to do, and they don't really stop and say, we missed that, what do we change? What can we do that's different? Going back to that rapid experimentation, what do we go with that's different that can help us back in line, and let's see if that works. And then you have to push. And the way I usually explain this is you have that goal and you know you missed it, or you know you'd exceeded it, or whatever it is. If you exceeded it in an organization, you don't take your foot off the pedal, you keep pushing. But if you missed it, you really, really push. You really push. You've got to think about your organization of like, your organization is something that you're pushing up a hill. It's not going to get there on its own, and you just have to physically shove it sometimes. Not everyone, in your organization, not everyone's going to have an ownership mentality. If you own the organization, you are intrinsically motivated to succeed. You can't have that with employees, or staff, or even your team that have shares in your organization. They're not going to have the same level of passion about it, and you have to accept that. But what you do is you just push and push and push until you hit those metrics, because that's the only way you're going to grow. The organizations I've seen that do grow, that's what they've done. And it's, so what we do in our organization is we have weekly and monthly meetings, and we say, how do we do? And then we just push ourselves to do better every single time. We didn't get enough face-to-face meetings. What can we do to get 5 more? And we push ourselves towards that. And I believe that is the end of my presentation. So thank you. Actually, it's a really good question. And there's a lot of debate on how you calculate cost of acquiring a customer, right? But really, let's put it into a real world example. You employ a salesperson, and you pay him, say, £40,000 a year. And in 1 year, he has 100 meetings, and he only converted one customer. There was no marketing around that. The entire cost of acquiring that one customer was down to that salesperson. That was it. And just to make it easy, he didn't have to pay national insurance or something either. So the cost of acquiring that customer was basically £40,000. So the answer is yeah. If you're failing, then you have to roll the entire cost. You see how many customers did you acquire, and you divide it by the entire expense that are directed across it. So it's quite hard to, if some organizations get very, very messy and fuzzy, and it's quite hard to isolate where the expenditure went and so on, but you can get a handle on it. The difficulty in terms of SaaS, in software as a service, is where do you draw the line? Because people employ like customer success teams and that kind of thing, which if you have prolonged trial periods and so on, then raise money and say that we have really, really good cost of acquisition, and you'll probably ignore that customer success and say, no, that's something else. But if you really want to grow your company and you want to keep some information internally, you would actually look at that and say, okay, this is a problem. They're serving as a sales team rather than a success team. Did that help? Did that answer your question?
Well, great talk.
Thank you.
Thanks for that.